What I'm, like Hidemi was saying, I recently got a new post, a new project. I'm part of a larger project that is in the Freie Universität in Berlin under the direction of Beatrice Grundler, who focuses on Kalila Vadimna, firstly in the Arab tradition, but also in all the other traditions linked to Kalila Vadimna. What I want to do today is briefly introduce you to Kalila Vadimna, the project, and then some first results, preliminary results, regarding especially the oldest version in Syriac of my work. What I first wanted to highlight is, and we already see that in the Fihrist of Al-Nadim, how important India was as a source of literature for the Middle East. And Middle East usually in the 10th century, of course, means Arab literature, but all the other literatures in the region took it either from the Arab or from the Persian, but the influence of Indian literature can never be overestimated. So I am focusing on fables, so I just took only his contribution, Al-Nadim's contribution on fables, and he then immediately names the books of the Indians about fables, evening stories and anecdotes. And of course, Kalila Vadimna has its own paragraph as being a very important text. But then again, he also mentioned quite a list of other literature which has a high entertainment value and a high moral value. It's usually moralistic and gnomological, so wisdom and teaching. Kalila Vadimna, or what it is in, still is in the old Syriac version, Kalila Vadimna, based on the Middle Persian, is a mirror of princes, existed or built on animal fables, and these are embedded texts, meaning there is a discussion between two people, and they then introduce a story in their discussion, and sometimes within that story, a new story is being told. So it's layered, these works. It always had a high entertainment value, although to begin with it was aimed at the higher elements of society, mirror of princes, meaning kings, caliphs, and other very important people. Later on, after the 13th, 14th century, most of the manuscripts indicate that it was used as entertainment for the common people. And you even see that in the texts changing slightly to adapt to a different audience. The origin of Kalila Vadimna is probably a Middle Persian collection, which is often attributed to a physician of the court of Khosrau I, who went to India, Burzoi, who collected the material. It is also sometimes called the Fables of Bitpai, although Al-Nadim thinks that that is a different story, a different work. Just a news flash, we actually nowadays seem to have a fragment, not much, not even a full page, but we have a fragment of the Middle Persian version from the 6th century, well, copied in a later work. Contents of Kalila Vadimna. Well, the first part is basically a retelling of the Panchatantra, the 5 books of the Panchatantra. In addition, from book 12 of Parva 12 of the Mahabharata, 3 stories are added as separate chapters in the Kalila Vadimna as well. When the Middle Persian collection was created, other stories were added to it as well, most notably The King and His 8 Dreams, which has a Buddhist, i.e. Indian origin, and The King of the Mice and Ministers. That might be Persian, might also be Indian. The transmission, important was that the work as we know it, the collection, was created in Middle Persian in the 6th century. Almost immediately after being collected, it was translated into Syriac, East Syrian Syriac. So some people say 570. I'm slightly less specific. Let's say last part of the 6th century, maybe even in the early 7th century. That Middle Persian text was also translated into Arabic around 750 by Ibn al-Mukaffa, and it is this text by Ibn al-Mukaffa that became the text which went all over the world. But, and that's important, this is a living tradition. What I mean by that, whoever copied the translation of Ibn al-Mukaffa was allowed, almost felt obliged to make the work fit his own audience, which means he reworked it, he adapted it. And it is debatable if we ever have, in any manuscript, have the pure Ibn al-Mukaffa. I doubt it, because all the manuscripts are later, and everybody, nearly every copyist made some changes to the texts. The second Syriac translation, the younger version, is based on one of these Arab texts, but is a clear adaptation of that text, adapted to a Syriac of the audience, a Syriac Christian audience, because there's a lot of biblical material in it, a lot of quotations from the Peshitta and other texts. These are from the 10th, 11th century. The impact of the Arab works is very influential because it went global. Let me illustrate this. You see the signs. The thicker the signs, the older the movement, but you see it all over Europe. You see it going into Mongolia, you see it going into Japan and into the Malay areas. You also see here an overview of the manuscripts. You can't read it, that's fine. To the left, the oldest, to the right, the youngest. You see that in the early phase, we have hardly any manuscripts. So we have the Syriac manuscripts, and we have some early Arab manuscripts, but it becomes only interesting in the 2nd millennium, and actually the second half of the 2nd millennium is where all the manuscripts are. That is important because I said every copyist adapts, which has an impact. Our knowledge of the oldest versions is limited. So having that second Syriac translation based on an early Arabic version makes that second Syriac text actually also very important to establish actually the development of the text within the Arab tradition as well. What are we doing in our project? We're trying to make a synoptic critical digital edition, which means we put next to each other various versions of the text, which would then help compare the versions in the various, in the long run, languages even. But that has an impact on how we edit, we observe more, and we do not reconstruct. So we are not searching for an urtext, and we try to stay as close to the manuscripts as possible, because we do not want to adapt the adaptations. That's the tricky bit. If you accept a living tradition, you can go for perfect Syriac or perfect Arabic, but that was possibly not what the author of that text was aiming for or able to. The goal is to document the history of the text in its preserved state and to analyze the context and factors of the textual development, which will eventually result in something like this. And Actually, even for more columns, we can run up to 70 columns next to each other. But every user will be able to filter what he is interested in. So what types of text he's interested in, what types of manuscripts he's interested in. And the Syriac is not part of the database yet, but will have 2 columns of their own. Now I'll go into the Syriac translations, the older version, as I said, based on the Middle Persian. Intriguingly enough, it contains poetic elements which were also present in the Panchatantra, which are missing in the oldest versions of the Arab tradition. And in later times, you find poetic elements in later Arab versions, but that is the prose text being redone into poetic elements. It has no link to the Sanskrit poetic elements as such. One of the issues that I will be dealing with is in combination with a Sanskrit person who will join the project next year, is to see whether or not the poetic elements in the old version link up with the poetic elements in the Panchatantra. It is the translator of this text is supposedly the perioditis Bud, which we find in Abdisho Barbriga, but Abdisho says that Bud translated it from the Indian text, which is a bit strange and indicates that Abdisho stands at the end of a long story about the origins of the text. So to what extent his information is correct can be debated. Possibly Bud is a mistaken form of Burzoi. What is important is that the old text, old Syriac version, the Syriac used is, let's say, it's not being taught here at SEERI. It's not grammatically correct, we would say. Word choice is also intriguing, which suggests that the translator, Syriac was not his mother tongue. He possibly was Persian or Iranian. He was Christian, but I have here a quote of Schultes, who edited the text. Tatsache ist, dass unser Text nach Abzug der gewöhnlichen Schreibfehler ein sprachliches Kolorit aufweist, mit dem sich an Inferiorität kaum ein anderes syrisches Literaturprodukt messen kann. Okay, we have to, he may be overstating it a bit, but no, this is not a text you would use to teach Syriac grammar. Let's just put it this way. What also is clear is that in the Syriac text, there are often names, either Persian or Sanskrit names, which were transliterated into Persian, which were then transliterated into Syriac. And there we have to go into linguistics about the Persian alphabet. That means that there are quite a few jumps possible. What struck me is that, in my opinion, there are few Persian loanwords for normal things. I have other Syriac texts from East Syrian text scene where there is, in the Syriac itself, Persian words are being used as daily utensils and stuff like that. That's more or less missing here. I'm surprised by that. Also, what we can see that, for example, the 8th chapter, the official title is Turich, who is called Shachel in Persian. The problem is that Turich is the Persian word, and Shachel probably goes back to a Sanskrit, which shows that he didn't fully understand, or a later copyist didn't fully understand what was going on here. For the older version, we have 4 manuscripts, and these are all copies of one manuscript, which dates, was originally in Mardin and dates from around 1500s. It was copied for Bickel and later Sachau. These 4 copies ended up in Germany. Then François Graffin, of course René, now I'm not sure. René Graffin got it from the cardinal of the not the Chalcedonian, the Chaldean cardinal, who brought it to Paris. He took it home with himself, he made some photos, and after that the manuscript is lost. Nobody, well, François No has seen it, but nobody else has seen it. François No saw it and has given a short description of it, in which he says that the manuscript had many internal corrections, and said it was the work of an écolier, of a student. So there were many things crossed out and corrected and stuff like that. It was in a Nestorian script. Why is it important that it was such a student work? If we remember, I said the Syriac is not very good. The question is it the original Syriac, was that already weak, or is that partly also caused by the type of manuscript we are working with? Quickly, the younger version, as I said, from the Arabic, from the 10th, 11th century, the translator was a critic. Again, possibly Arabic as his mother tongue, because his Syriac is better, but also not perfect. And there are some strange Arabic influences in his Syriac. It's based on an old Arabic version that can, amongst other things, be proven by the sequence of the stories, but it is clearly a Christian adaptation, as I said, full of quotations from the Bible. This we only have in one manuscript, which is in Dublin. The manuscript itself is a story in itself. I won't go into that, but even that text needs further debate, and more debate than usually given. Other versions of Kalila Madimna in a Syriac context, we have some Gershuni versions of it. They all, of course, belong to the Arabic tradition and are all late. One beautiful example is in the Chaldean Cathedral in Mardin, number 491. There's also a Neo-Aramaic version, or simplified Syriac, as some people have called it, by Thomas Audo. Again, it's in the Arabic tradition, although it might be at least inspired by the Wright's edition of the younger version. Then we have some fragments in Barbahlul in his quotations in his dictionary. Fable as a genre in Syriac context, fables were also a favorite in the Syriac tradition. Next to Kalila Vadimna, we have elements of, or full texts of Ahikar, Aesop, the history of the 10 viziers, Sinban, Catholicos, Abdishu. One has a work in Abdishu Barbarecha, the Book of Foxes. There is Gnomologia, so wisdom in sayings, popular philosophical literature, and there's even some stuff in the Alexander romance and Alexander-related material, which Muriel may well make some reference to. What we have done the last few months was a closer inspection, I'll hurry up, of the cat and mouse, which is one small chapter. The frame story is a king asks a philosopher about, to give him an example of a man who is surrounded by his enemies and who survives by cooperating with one of them. It is an unframed story, as I said, several layers. And the wisdom of it all is any strategic friendship can and should come to an end. What we have done in the project is we divide it in very short segments because that gives us in the synoptic edition the possibility to put the various stories next to each other. So you can create your own text per segment, which is usually not much more than 1 or 2 lines, but in the Syriac, but in longer Arabic versions, it can be half a page almost. The older Syriac versions clearly has Sanskrit names from the Mahabharata, notably Bhishma, Yudhishthira, which all is used in, has been changed through because of the Middle Persian in between, but it is clearly recognizable. What the author also has done is that he is using some intriguing translations. So he uses, for example, paresia for I give you my word of honor, which is not the most common way of using that word. He also uses, for example, Brahm to indicate to gnaw of mice, which can be done, but is not the normal choice. And there are, the list is longer like that. It's like not wrong, but strange. What is intriguing when we compare the contents between the Mahabharata, this is a story we all find in the Mahabharata, the Old Syriac, and in the Arab versions, both the Mahabharata and the Old Syriac version indicate that it is a weak person surrounded by enemies. What does a weak person do? In the Arab versions, it's any king surrounded by enemies. And in the run of the story, it's quite important to see that actually the mouse is very weak. The mouse cannot deal even with one enemy, let alone with more than one enemy. This element is highlighted in the story, but in the Arab version, that is not, it pops up once and then the entire discussion doesn't make sense, because for the Arabs there's no such thing as a weak person in this story. Also, the mouse is, there is a physical contact between the mouse and the cat when they agree to cooperate. And it's the cat who is caught in the net and the mouse gnaws through the net to free it, in order that the cat then can kill or at least chase away potential other enemies of the mouse, namely an owl and a mongoose. And it all works, but under certain conditions. Another aspect of the story is that in the stories, an elephant as an illustration takes a center stage. But in the Mahabharata, that's a story about tame elephants which are being used to catch wild elephants. In the Syriac and in the Arabic version, that story is completely lost, and they come up with a story about the dangers for a man who rides on the tusk of an elephant. If you fall off, you're dead. Living on the edge of a sword, basically. Where that comes from, I don't know. I haven't found it in any translation of Indian stories, so this may be an invention of the Persians. What is also intriguing is that the mouse delays cutting the rope and releasing the cat even after the other enemies are gone, because he's basically scared that if the cat is free, he might go after the mouse after all, even though they have an agreement. So he kind of waits until the hunter who created that net is almost in sight, so the cat has to flee for the hunter and cannot try and catch the mouse, which the cat thinks is a bit dubious because they had an agreement, so why not release me immediately? And the intriguing thing is that both the Mahabharata and the Arab versions explicitly states that the mouse explicitly states that he will wait until the hunter comes. In the Syriac, he just delays and doesn't say anything much. He just does it. But he doesn't really go into a discussion with the cat. So, epilogue. Just 2 or 3 remarks. The Syriac versions are part of a greater Near Eastern tradition based on an Indian tradition, which then went all global, and they both play a central role in that tradition. Importantly, the Old Syriac reflects really the oldest version of Kalila that we have. What needs to be also, I couldn't go into it at too much, but it may be that it actually reflects an abbreviated version of the Middle Persian rather than a full translation of the Middle Persian.